The winter wind howled through the cracks of Nora Kelly's dilapidated cabin like a hungry wolf, intensifying the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. 3 days without food had left her weak, but it was the pitiful whimpers of her 2-month-old son, bundled in threadbare blankets, that broke her spirit. Montana Territory, 1876, a beautiful but merciless land that had first taken her husband and now threatened to take everything else. Nora stroked little Thomas's cheek, his face flushed with hunger. "Just hold on a little longer, my sweet boy," she whispered, her voice cracking. The baby's cries grew louder, echoing off the bare walls of the homestead she and her husband James had built with such hope just a year ago. James had been gone for 4 months now, killed by a falling tree while cutting timber with other men from the settlement. Nora had managed to get by on their meager savings and the kindness of neighbors, but the harsh winter had isolated their remote cabin, and their supplies had finally run out. She peered through the frosted window at the snow-blanketed landscape. The nearest town was 15 miles away, an impossible journey on foot in this weather, especially with a baby. Tears rolled down her gaunt face. She'd tried everything, rationing their food to dangerous levels, setting snares for rabbits, even chewing on pine bark as she'd heard the native people sometimes did. A sudden noise outside startled her, the distinct sound of horse hooves crunching through snow. Nora clutched Thomas tighter, her heart racing. Raiders sometimes prowled these parts, preying on vulnerable homesteads. She reached for James's old rifle, though she knew there was no ammunition left. At least she could bluff. The footsteps approached the door, heavy and deliberate. 3 sharp knocks followed. "Hello? Anybody home?" A deep male voice called out. Nora hesitated, weighing her options. The baby's cries grew louder. "I heard a baby. If you're in there, I mean no harm. I'm just a traveler seeking shelter from the storm." Desperation overrode caution. Nora tucked the unloaded rifle behind the door and opened it just enough to see a tall figure, his shoulders dusted with snow. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to sound stronger than she felt. The man removed his hat, revealing a weathered face with kind blue eyes beneath a shock of dark blonde hair. "Name's Daniel O'Malley, madam. My horse and I got caught in this blizzard. I was hoping to wait out the worst of it before continuing to Silverdale." Silverdale, the town where Nora's remaining supplies and the post office lay, tantalizingly out of reach. "I'm Nora Kelly," she said finally, opening the door wider. "This is my son, Thomas." Daniel stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. His gaze took in the barren cabin, the empty pantry shelves, the cold hearth, the conspicuous absence of cooking smells. His expression softened with understanding. "Looks like you two have been having a rough time," he said quietly. Thomas let out another hungry wail, and Nora couldn't hold back her sob. "My husband's gone. We've been without food for 3 days. I don't know what to do anymore." Daniel's face set with determination. He removed his heavy saddlebags from his shoulder. "Then we'll eat what I've got, Mrs. Kelly." He opened his bags to reveal jerky, dried apples, coffee beans, a small sack of flour, and even a jar of preserved peaches. To Nora's starving eyes, it looked like a king's feast. "I can't take your provisions," she protested weakly. "You're not taking anything. I'm sharing," he said firmly, already moving to restart the fire in the hearth. No one goes hungry when Daniel O'Malley has food to spare. Within half an hour, the cabin was warm for the first time in days, filled with the aroma of coffee and a simple stew Daniel had prepared using his provisions and melted snow for water. As Nora sipped the broth, feeling life flow back into her limbs, she studied her unexpected savior. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to taking care of himself, yet there was a gentleness in how he spoke to her baby, cooing softly as Thomas drank the milk Daniel had somehow fashioned from water and the last of his own supplies. "How did you know how to prepare milk for him?" Nora asked. Daniel's eyes clouded briefly. "Had a sister who lost her husband. Helped her with her little one for a spell." He didn't elaborate further, but Nora sensed there was more to the story. "You're handy to have around in a crisis, Mr. O'Malley." "Daniel, please." He smiled, and for the first time in months, Nora felt something stir within her besides grief and fear. "Where are you headed, Daniel?" "Beyond Silverdale, I mean. Wherever the trail takes me. Been working as a cattle driver, but the season's over. Thought I might try my hand at prospecting up north." "Alone?" His laugh was warm, but tinged with something like loneliness. Just me and Samson, that's my horse. Been that way for some time now. As night fell and the storm intensified, Daniel insisted on sleeping on the floor near the fire, giving Nora and Thomas the cabin's only bed. Nora protested, but he was adamant. I've slept on worse, believe me. Many a night under the stars with nothing but my saddle for a pillow. Lying in bed with Thomas finally sleeping peacefully beside her, Nora listened to Daniel's steady breathing. For the first time since James's death, she didn't feel completely alone against the world. Morning brought clearer skies, but deeper snow. Daniel stood at the window, frowning at the white expanse that had swallowed the landscape. No traveling today, he announced. Maybe not tomorrow either. Nora felt a complicated mix of relief and anxiety. Relief at not being left alone again so soon. Anxiety at the continued drain on Daniel's supplies. I have some sewing I could do, she offered, to repay you for the food. Daniel glanced down at his worn jacket. Wouldn't say no to that. Been a while since these clothes saw a woman's touch. They settled into an unexpected routine. Daniel ventured out to chop more firewood and check his horse in the small lean-to stable. Nora prepared simple meals from his provisions, stretching them as far as possible, and mended his clothes. Thomas seemed to brighten in Daniel's presence, cooing and reaching for the man's calloused fingers. On the third day, Daniel returned from outside with a snowshoe hare he'd managed to snare. Looks like we'll have a proper dinner tonight, he announced triumphantly. Nora couldn't help but smile at his boyish pride. You're full of surprises, Cowboy. That evening, as they shared the rabbit stew, Daniel spoke of his life on the range, of cattle drives from Texas to Montana, of the characters he'd met along the way. What about family? Nora asked. Surely someone misses you when you're on these adventures. Daniel stared into his bowl. Parents died of fever when I was 19. Sister married a banker and moved east. We write occasionally, but... He shrugged. The open country gets in your blood. Couldn't imagine being hemmed in by city walls now. And no wife? No sweetheart waiting somewhere. His smile was wistful. Nearly married once. Emily was her name. Her father owned the ranch where I worked in Colorado. But she wanted a settled life, and I still had wandering to do. Do you regret it? Not settling down? Daniel considered the question, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. Some nights, when the wind's howling like a banshee and there's not another soul for miles. Yeah, I wonder what might have been. Nora felt a surprising pang of jealousy toward this unknown Emily. She must have been special. She was. But that was years ago. His gaze met hers across the table. What about you? How'd you end up out here? Nora told him about meeting James at a harvest dance in Illinois, about his dreams of claiming land in the West, of building something that would be truly their own. He was so full of plans, she said softly, looking around the humble cabin. This was just the beginning. He talked about a proper farm, maybe even a ranch someday. Her voice caught. Then the accident happened, and suddenly I was alone with a newborn, trying to hold on to his dream without him. Daniel reached across the table and covered her hand with his. You've done right by him, Nora. Many would have given up and headed back east. I've considered it, she admitted. But this was our dream. I can't just abandon it. Admirable, but practical matters need addressing, Daniel said gently. Winter's only beginning. Without supplies. I know. The specter of starvation, temporarily banished by Daniel's arrival, loomed again. But I can't leave. Not yet. As the days passed, Daniel found reasons to extend his stay. First, it was the depth of the snow. Then, a mild fever that struck Thomas, requiring constant attention. Each morning, Nora expected Daniel to announce his departure, and each evening, she felt guilty relief when he remained. A week turned into two. They fell into domestic rhythms that felt surprisingly natural. Daniel repaired the loose shingles on the roof, reinforced the stable, and even constructed crude but effective snowshoes. Nora kept the cabin in order, stretched their provisions with creative cooking, and cared for Thomas, who thrived under their combined attention. One evening, as Daniel whittled a small wooden horse for Thomas, he looked up to find Nora watching him intently. Something wrong with my technique? He asked with a half-smile. No, she said softly. I was just thinking how strange life is. A month ago, I was certain Thomas and I would die here alone. And now. Now I can't imagine this place without you in it." The confession hung in the air between them, fraught with implications. Daniel set down his carving knife. "Nora, A sharp cry from Thomas interrupted whatever he'd been about to say. The moment passed as Nora hurried to tend to her son, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings growing too powerful to ignore. The next day brought unexpected clarity in the skies and complications to their fragile arrangement. The snow had compacted enough that travel was possible again. They both knew Daniel had no legitimate reason to stay longer. "I should head to Silverdale tomorrow," he announced over breakfast, his voice carefully neutral. "We're running low on supplies, and you and Thomas need more than just the basics." Nora nodded, fighting the despair rising in her throat. "Of course. You've been more than generous with your time already. I'll bring back whatever you need." He hesitated. "And then we should talk about your options for the rest of winter." "My options? You can't stay here alone, Nora. It's too isolated, too dangerous." "This is my home," she said, a flash of her old determination surfacing. "A home needs to sustain life, not threaten it." His voice was gentle but firm. "At minimum, you should consider wintering in town, then returning in spring." She wanted to argue, but knew he was right. Her stubbornness could cost Thomas his life. "I'll think about it," she conceded. That night, as Daniel packed for his journey, the air in the cabin was thick with unspoken words. Nora put Thomas to bed early and approached Daniel as he checked his saddlebags. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." He turned to face her, his expression conflicted. "Nora, I need to say something before I go." "Then say it." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I've lived my whole adult life on the move. Never found a reason compelling enough to stay in one place." His voice was low, almost a whisper. Until now. Nora felt dizzy with hope and fear. "What are you saying, Daniel?" "I'm saying that in 2 weeks, this cabin has felt more like home than anywhere I've been in years. And it's not because of the 4 walls or the roof." He reached out, his fingers grazing her cheek. "It's because of you. You and Thomas." Nora closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "We barely know each other. I know enough. I know you're the strongest woman I've ever met. I know that when you smile, it feels like sunrise after the longest night." His hand cradled her face now. "I know that the thought of riding away from here tomorrow feels like tearing out part of myself." "Then don't," she whispered, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "Don't go. Or if you must, come back to us." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, then deepened with the force of feelings too long restrained. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I will come back," Daniel promised. "With supplies, with news from town, with whatever we need to make it through winter. But Nora, when spring comes." She pressed her fingers to his lips. "When spring comes, we'll decide together what happens next. For now, that's enough." Morning came too quickly. Daniel readied Samson for the journey to Silverdale, loading him with empty sacks to fill with provisions. 3 days, he said, clasping Nora's hands in the pale dawn light. "For at most if the weather turns. You have enough firewood and food until then." She nodded, fighting tears. "We'll be fine. Be careful." He kissed her once more, then Thomas's forehead, before mounting Samson. Nora stood in the doorway, watching until horse and rider disappeared into the tree-line. The cabin felt cavernous without Daniel's presence. Thomas seemed to sense the change, fussing more than usual. Nora kept busy, banking the fire carefully to conserve wood, reviewing their remaining supplies, telling Thomas stories of the future she now dared to imagine. 2 days passed without incident. On the 3rd, a light snow began to fall. By nightfall, it had intensified into another full blizzard. Nora paced the floor, clutching Thomas to her chest, praying that Daniel had either reached Silverdale before the storm hit or found shelter along the way. The 4th day dawned with no sign of Daniel and no break in the weather. By the 5th day, Nora's worry had crystallized into a dull dread. Their supplies were dwindling again. The firewood would last another 3 days at most. On the 6th day, as Nora melted snow for Thomas's milk, she heard the distant sound of bells. She rushed to the window, heart racing. Through the swirling snow, she could make out not one horse, but several, pulling what looked like a large sled. She threw open the door as the conveyance pulled up to the cabin. Daniel jumped down from the driver's seat, His face split in a wide grin despite being nearly blue with cold. "Daniel." She ran to him, nearly slipping in the snow, Thomas bundled against her chest. He caught her, enveloping both her and the baby in a fierce embrace. "Told you I'd come back." Behind him, a second man climbed down from the sled. "This the woman you nearly talked my ear off about, O'Malley?" Daniel laughed, his arms still around Nora. "Nora Kelly, meet Walter Simmons. He runs the general store in Silverdale and was kind enough to help me bring all this back." He gestured to the sled, which Nora now saw was piled high with crates and sacks. "All this," she gasped. "Flour, sugar, coffee, preserved meat, milk powder for the little one, canned goods, new blankets, medicine, ammunition for your rifle, tools, even some fabric for new clothes," Daniel listed proudly. "Should see us through until spring, with plenty to spare." "But how? This must have cost a fortune." Daniel's expression grew more serious. "I had savings. Been carrying it for years, never finding the right thing to spend it on." His eyes held hers. "This is the right thing, Nora." Walter Simmons cleared his throat. "We should get this unloaded before the weather worsens again." The next hour was a flurry of activity as they transferred the supplies into the cabin. Walter declined Nora's invitation to stay for a meal, eager to start back to town before darkness fell. As the storekeeper prepared to leave, he pulled Daniel aside for a private word. Nora saw Daniel nod solemnly before shaking Walter's hand. Once they were alone, Nora couldn't contain her questions. "What did he say to you? And how did you convince him to make this journey in such weather?" Daniel hung his coat by the fire. "Walter's a good man. Lost his wife years ago. Knows what it's like to face hardship alone." He turned to face her. "As for what he said just now, he was letting me know that the pastor makes regular circuits through these parts. Should be in Silverdale come February." Nora's breath caught. "The pastor?" Daniel crossed the room to where she stood. "I'm not presuming anything, Nora. I know it's fast. I know you're still grieving James." He took her hands in his. "But I also know what I feel, and I think you feel it too." "Daniel, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking for an answer now. Just telling you that when you're ready, if you're ready, I want to build a life here with you and Thomas. Make this place everything James dreamed it could be." Tears filled Nora's eyes. "You'd stay? Give up the trail for us?" "In a heartbeat." His smile was tender. "Turns out all my wandering was just looking for the right place to call home. And it's not a place at all, it's wherever you two are." That night, with Thomas sleeping soundly in his newly reinforced cradle and the cabin warmer and better stocked than it had ever been, Nora and Daniel sat before the fire, planning the future that suddenly seemed possible. "Come spring, we could plant a proper garden," Daniel mused. "Walter says there's a family selling dairy cows about 20 miles east. And we could add a room to the cabin," Nora added. "Thomas will need his own space eventually." Daniel's hand found hers. "Is that a yes, then? You'll have me." Nora looked into the face of this man who had appeared like a miracle when she needed one most. "It's a yes. Not because you saved us, though you did, but because in the darkest time of my life, you brought light back in. Made me believe in tomorrow again." February arrived with milder weather and the promised visit from Pastor Williams. In a simple ceremony attended by Walter Simmons and a few curious neighbors who'd heard the remarkable story of the stranded widow and the cowboy who'd saved her, Nora Kelly became Nora O'Malley. That night, as they lay together as husband and wife for the first time, Daniel traced the contours of Nora's face in the moonlight. "Happy," he whispered. "More than I ever thought possible again," she answered truthfully. With the turning of winter into spring, the O'Malley homestead began to transform. Daniel proved as skilled at farming as he had been at cattle driving. Under his care, the fields surrounding the cabin yielded their first crops. The 2 milk cows he purchased provided more than enough for their needs, with extra to trade in town. Nora, too, found new purpose. Beyond caring for Thomas, who grew into a sturdy toddler with his stepfather's adventurous spirit, she began making cheese and butter to sell in Silverdale. Her reputation for fine needlework spread, bringing commissions from as far as Helena. Their first full summer together brought a surprise Nora was expecting. The news filled Daniel with a joy so profound it sometimes overwhelmed him. "Never thought I'd be a father," he confessed one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Thomas playing with wooden animals at their feet. Always figured that wasn't in the cards for a drifter like me. And now? Nora asked, guiding his hand to her growing belly. Now I can't imagine anything better. He kissed her tenderly. Though I admit, I'm terrified I won't know what to do. You've been a wonderful father to Thomas already. It was true. The bond between Daniel and Thomas had grown so strong that sometimes Nora found herself wishing James could see how well his son was being cared for. There was no jealousy in this thought, only gratitude that Thomas would grow up knowing a father's love. The harvest that year was bountiful enough that Daniel hired 2 young men from town to help bring it in. As they celebrated with a small feast afterward, Nora looked around the expanded cabin at the sturdy table Daniel had crafted, at the curtains she'd sewn from fabric he'd brought from town, at the cradle he was already preparing for their coming child, and marveled at how far they'd come from that desperate winter day when she'd thought all was lost. In November, as the first snows began to dust the mountains, Nora gave birth to a daughter they named Eliza, after Daniel's mother. Unlike Thomas's birth, which had been fraught with fear and uncertainty, Eliza arrived surrounded by love and security, with a midwife from town in attendance, and Daniel pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. When Daniel first held his daughter, his hands trembling slightly with the precious burden, Nora saw in his eyes the same wonder she felt that this perfect being was theirs, a physical manifestation of the love that had bloomed in the most unlikely circumstances. Winter that year was as harsh as the one before, but this time they were prepared. The root cellar was stocked with preserved vegetables and fruits. Smoked meat hung in the storehouse Daniel had built. The barn sheltered not just Samson, but 2 additional horses, the milk cows, and a small flock of chickens. On the coldest nights, the 4 of them would huddle together by the fire, Thomas enthralled by Daniel's stories of his cowboy days, Eliza nursing contentedly at Nora's breast. In these moments, Nora would catch Daniel's eye across the room and see in his expression a contentment that matched her own, the peace of souls who had found their harbor after weathering life's storms. Spring brought new beginnings again. Daniel expanded their operations, adding sheep to their growing farm. Nora's cheese became so popular that Walter Simmons offered to ship it to Helena on commission. By summer, they had hired a permanent farmhand, a quiet, hard-working young man named Peter who had a way with animals and was grateful for the small cabin Daniel built for him at the edge of their property. Thomas, now 3, shadowed Daniel everywhere, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. Helping Papa, he would announce proudly, his small hands mimicking Daniel's movements with tools or with the animals. The first time he'd called Daniel Papa, it had brought tears to Daniel's eyes. Later, he'd confessed to Nora his fear that it somehow dishonored James's memory. James would be grateful, Nora had assured him. Grateful that his son knows a father's love. That's all any parent wants for their child. As their second wedding anniversary approached, Daniel became secretive, disappearing into town more often than usual and being deliberately vague about his errands. Nora suspected he was planning some surprise, but nothing prepared her for what awaited when he took her for a ride one crisp September morning, leaving Thomas and Eliza in Peter's capable hands. They rode for about half an hour, cresting a gentle hill that overlooked a beautiful valley. There, nestled among cottonwood trees beside a clear stream, stood a partly constructed building. "Daniel, what is this?" Nora asked, confused. He helped her down from her horse, his expression a mix of nervousness and pride. "This is our future, if you want it." He led her closer, and she could now see the foundations of what promised to be a substantial structure much larger than their cabin. "I've been talking with Walter and some businessmen in Helena," Daniel explained. "This valley is perfect for a way station. The new stage route they're planning will come right through here. We could offer lodging, meals, fresh horses." Nora turned slowly, taking in the vision Daniel described. "You mean build an inn? A proper business? More than that. A home for our family with room to grow." His eyes sparkled with excitement. "The upper floor would be all ours, bedrooms for the children, space for whatever else we might need. The main floor would have a dining room, kitchen, common area for guests." "It's ambitious," she said, but she was already picturing it, the bustling kitchen where she would serve her recipes to travelers, the garden she could plant along the stream, the rooms upstairs where their children would grow. "Too ambitious?" Daniel asked, watching her reaction closely. Nora laughed, surprising herself with the joy that bubbled up. Since when have we shied away from challenges? If anyone had told me 2 years ago that a starving widow and a wandering cowboy would build all we already have. Relief washed over Daniel's features. So you like the idea? I love it. She wrapped her arms around his neck. And I love you, Daniel O'Malley. Your dreams have become my dreams. They kissed beneath the cottonwoods, planning their future between breaths. They would maintain the farmstead, too. Perhaps Peter would want more responsibility there while focusing on building their new venture. By the following summer, the O'Malley Way station welcomed its first guests, a family traveling west to Oregon. By autumn, they had regular business from the stagecoach line, just as Daniel had predicted. Within 2 years, they had added a small general store to serve not just travelers but the growing number of settlers in the area. Life was not without its hardships. A flash flood one spring threatened their crops. Thomas broke his arm falling from a horse when he was 7. Nora miscarried what would have been their 3rd child, a loss that cast a shadow over an otherwise joyful existence. But through it all, the foundation they had built that desperate winter only grew stronger. Their love deepened with each challenge faced together, each triumph shared. 10 years after Daniel had first knocked on Nora's door, the O'Malley Way station had become a landmark on the Montana frontier. Their family had grown to include not just Thomas and Eliza, but twin boys James and Michael, born 5 years into their marriage. On a summer evening much like the one when Daniel had first shown Nora the sight of their future in, they sat on the wide porch watching their children play in the twilight. Thomas, now 12 and showing signs of the man he would become, supervised his younger siblings' game of tag. "Did you ever imagine this?" Nora asked, her head resting on Daniel's shoulder. "That day when you found us starving in that cabin?" Daniel's arm tightened around her. "I couldn't have dreamed something this perfect. Though I knew, even then, that you were someone worth staying for. Even though I was a mess, a half-starved widow with a crying baby. Especially then." He kissed the top of her head. "Your strength amazed me. Still does." From the yard came the sounds of childish laughter as Eliza chased after one of the twins. Thomas called out instructions, every bit the responsible oldest brother. "We've been blessed," Nora murmured. "That we have." Daniel's voice held a note of wonder still, after all these years. "From we'll eat what I've got to all of this." He gestured to encompass their thriving business, their beautiful home, their healthy children. Who would have thought? As twilight deepened into night, they called the children in for supper. Sitting around the large table in the family's private dining room, Daniel at one end, Nora at the other, their 4 children between them, they joined hands for grace. Daniel's eyes met Nora's across the table, and in that glance was the same warmth, the same promise that had sustained them through a decade of building their life together. "Thank you," Daniel said, speaking the traditional words of grace, but looking directly at Nora, "for the food before us, the love between us, and the family around us." Later, when the children were tucked into bed and the last guest had retired for the night, Daniel and Nora stood on their porch, his arm around her waist as they gazed at the stars. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. "About the path your life took?" Nora considered the question seriously, as she always did. "I miss James sometimes," she admitted. "I wish he could see Thomas growing into such a fine young man." Daniel nodded, understanding as always. "But regrets?" "No." She turned in his arms to face him. "How could I regret the greatest blessing of my life? You didn't just save us, Daniel. You helped me build something more beautiful than I ever imagined possible." "We built it together," he corrected gently. "Yes, we did." She reached up to trace the lines that years of sun and laughter had etched around his eyes. "And we'll keep building, as long as we have each other." As they sealed this promise with a kiss, the Montana night spread its canopy of stars above them, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning, that would watch over their children's children, that would shine on all the stories yet to unfold on this land they now called home. In the vast tapestry of the American West, theirs was just one thread, a tale of hunger turned to plenty, of desperation transformed into hope, of 2 souls finding in each other the courage to create a future neither could have achieved alone. And if the essence of the frontier spirit was the ability to forge something from nothing, to see possibility where others saw only hardship, then perhaps their love story was, in its way, the truest expression of the Western dream.